There's a diagnosis that affects roughly 1 in 5 people at some point in their lives. We've been treating it essentially the same way for 60 years, and there is now serious evidence that for a significant number of those people, perhaps as many as a third, we've been treating the wrong thing entirely. I'm talking about depression, and I'm about to make the case that in many people, it's primarily a disease of the body, driven by your immune system, not a disorder of your thoughts or your serotonin levels. The mechanism involves a Cambridge psychiatrist, a root canal, a depressed mouse, and a myth that they taught us at medical school that turns out to be not quite correct. Stay with me here, there's a takeaway at the end. I'm a doctor, and somewhere along the way I became the one that people text when something medical lands in the group chat. Someone sends an article, a problem, they tag me, and I end up spending a bit of time doing something slightly different from what the headline suggested, trying to work out whether the claim is actually true, and then separately whether it's true for the specific person who just sent it. And these are genuinely different questions. Most of health media exists very comfortably in the gap between them. And that's more or less how this channel came about. The Accidental Doctor, which is also a reasonably accurate description of how I ended up in medicine in the first place, nearly 30 years ago. Not entirely planned, apparently ongoing. And at the same point, it seemed like the least that I could do with 3 decades of pattern matching was make some of it actually available to people who don't happen to have a doctor in the family. This is one of those topics I think genuinely changes how you understand something you already thought you understood. We're talking about depression and about what a Cambridge psychiatrist worked out after an unusually productive trip to the dentist. Uncommon sense medicine. So here's what we're going to cover, and here's what I'm promising you by the end of it. First, why the standard explanation for depression, the one that your GP originally learned in medical school, the one that gave us antidepressants, is incomplete for a significant proportion of people that it's applied to. Then, the actual mechanism, which involves your immune system talking to your brain in ways that we didn't think were possible. Then, 6 specific things that drive inflammatory depression because naming them matters. And then, what the evidence says that you can do about it. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you a concrete, usable checklist. Things that you can take to a GP appointment, lifestyle changes ranked by how well they hold up under scrutiny, and a short guide as to whether any of this is likely to be relevant to you specifically. The goal is that you leave this not just knowing something interesting, but knowing what to do with it, which is, in my experience, the thing health content most reliably fails to provide. Right, now, let's get to the dentist. Professor Ed Bullmore, Cambridge psychiatrist, over 500 published papers, author of The Inflamed Mind, a book. And our story starts with him in a dentist chair with an infected jaw, the root canal, the medical equivalent of a very bad Tuesday. He went home afterwards feeling genuinely miserable, not just sore, but actually low, flat, gloomy. He couldn't be bothered with anyone. His first instinct was the classic explanation. Obviously you're depressed. You've just had painful dental work. You've been reminded of your own mortality. Very natural, very human, and very possibly wrong. Because then he thought, what if this infection in his jaw released inflammatory proteins called cytokines into his bloodstream? Those proteins crossed into his brain and they directly changed his mood. Not metaphorically, but chemically and biologically. The infection made him depressed, not the existential weight of dental bills, the infection. And Bullmore argues that the reason medicine missed this for so long is a split that goes back to Descartes. This deeply embedded idea that mind and body are separate things, it's baked into how medicine is organized. Psychiatrists look after the mind, physicians look after the body, and dentists look after the mouth. They barely speak to each other. Bullmore calls this arrangement administratively convenient, which if you've ever tried to get a psychiatric referral while also seeing a gastroenterologist, you will find darkly funny. At medical school in the 1980s, Bullmore was taught that the brain is completely protected by the blood-brain barrier, which is that most things through the bloodstream can actually get into the brain. And he called it the Berlin Wall of human biology. And it turns out that the wall doesn't really exist as a wall. It's not a wide open door for sure, but it is a filtered portal. Cytokines slip through, white blood cells slip through. Whatever is happening in your body, your brain is getting the signals. Now, when those cytokines reach the brain, they change the activity of circuits that are critical for your mood. You can see it actually on brain scans. Change the inflammatory state of the body, change the activity in the mood-related regions of the brain, directly, not as a side effect, but as a mechanism. There's beautiful animal evidence here. Inflame a mouse, trigger its immune system, and it becomes less exploratory, less mobile, less interested in other mice. It withdraws, it stops engaging. From the outside, it looks like, well, a depressed mouse. Now, why would evolution build that in? Because when you're fighting infection or recovering from injury, withdrawal makes sense. Sleep more, eat less, stop socializing, conserve your energy. Let the immune system do its work. This is called sickness behavior. Ancient, adaptive, and it looks a lot like depression. The problem is when it doesn't switch off. Chronic, low-grade inflammation keeps the brain permanently in sick mode. That, Bullmore argues, is depression in roughly a third of people who have it. In the 19th century, if you had malaria, the doctor diagnosed fever and treated the fever. Treat the symptom, not the cause. The breakthrough came when medicine stopped asking what is the symptom and started asking what is the actual germ that gave us antibiotics and vaccines. Infectious disease stopped being a death sentence. Bullmore's point is that psychiatry is still largely in the fever area. Someone walks in feeling low, not sleeping, can't get out of bed, and within minutes they have an antidepressant prescription. No meaningful investigation of why, rarely any blood tests, little attempt to understand what's driving the symptoms. This is why many people with depression don't respond to antidepressants. Because their depression isn't primarily a serotonin problem, it's an inflammation problem, and no antidepressant in the world cools your immune system. You are, to use a technical term, treating the wrong thing. I say this as someone who has prescribed antidepressants. For appropriate patients, they can work well. For a significant proportion, something else is going on and we mostly haven't been looking for it well enough. So what actually drives inflammatory depression? 6 things stand out. Obesity. The more excess fat tissue, the more immune cells living in that fat, releasing inflammatory signals into the bloodstream. The fat is chemically altering your mood. It's not a moral statement, it's physiology, and it's why obesity and depression are so strongly linked. Not primarily because carrying excess weight is psychologically difficult, though it can be, but because adipose tissue, fat tissue, is doing something biological to your brain. The microbiome. A huge proportion of your immune system lives in your gut. Change the bacteria through ultra-processed food, stress, antibiotics, and you trigger an immune response that travels through the brain. Diet to microbiome, immune response to brain. This is why mood can shift within weeks of changing what you eat, long before any blood test catches up. Gum disease, a chronic low-grade infection that most adults have without knowing it. The inflammation reaches the brain systemically. There are epidemiological links to depression and to accelerated Alzheimer's disease. Dentists and GPs almost certainly never speak to each other. Menopause. Women experiencing mood changes during menopause are often told that they're responding to the psychological weight of the transition. Bullmore's view is that this explanation is probably backwards, that the hormonal and the immune changes are likely directly affecting mood circuits in the brain, physiologically, not psychologically. The distinction matters because the treatment is completely different. And what about aging? Well, as we age, the immune system becomes more chronically activated, a process called inflammaging. The amyloid deposits in Alzheimer's brains trigger an immune response in the brain itself. If depression and dementia sound like they might share a root cause, that's because they might. The lifestyle that protects your mood today may be protecting your brain from dementia in 30 years. Whether that's encouraging or exhausting probably depends on how your morning is going. Chronic stress, especially in childhood. Psychosocial stress activates the immune system just like a physical infection, and the immune system has a memory. That's the entire principle behind vaccination. Childhood adversity can prime the immune system in ways that persist for decades. I want to be precise about this. That is not weakness. It is a measurable biological consequence of experience. The system that was supposed to protect you kept some of the activation running in case it was needed again. It wasn't a character flaw, it was a survival strategy that outlasted its usefulness. Now, here is where I have some good news, and one observation about the food industry I'm going to make once and then move past. The lifestyle interventions I recommend for heart disease, metabolic health, and energy turn out to be among the most powerful anti-inflammatory tools we have. We now understand mechanistically why they also affect mood. Exercise, equivalent to antidepressants in some randomized controlled trials. What matters is sustained consistency, not heroic intensity. Bullmore counts his steps, 10,000 a day. Walking counts. Not glamorous, but it's genuinely effective. The Mediterranean diet. There's a strong association with lower inflammation and better mood. Eating olive oil, cold-pressed, extra virgin, fish, oily fish in particular, vegetables, legumes, nuts. But ultra-processed food does the opposite. It feeds the wrong microbiome, it drives inflammation, and it drives down mood. It's almost as though the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry have reached some kind of understanding. Now, I'm not saying that, but I'm just noticing that there is a structure of incentives here. Sleep. One of the most potent inflammatory triggers that we know. Fix the sleep first. Everything else is secondary to this. I know it sounds obvious. I also know it's not always simple, but it is the cheapest intervention on the whole list. Yoga and meditation. Bullmore is honest. 15 years ago, he would have called this woo-woo. Now, based on the inflammatory pathway evidence, he thinks that these interventions probably work. The science is finally catching up with the hippies. And ask your GP about inflammation directly. Request a CRP blood test. It's a basic, inexpensive marker of systemic inflammation, and it's rarely ordered in standard depression blood test workups. Push them also to look at you as the whole person that you are, and not to route you through a system that treats your mouth, your brain, your gut, and your mood as separate departments that have never met. Right, I said at the start that there'd be something concrete at the end, and I don't like people who make promises and then hand you a vague recommendation to eat better and sleep more. So here's what I'll give you. 3 questions worth asking your GP, a list of interventions ranked honestly by how well the evidence holds up, and a short guide to whether inflammatory depression is likely to be relevant to your situation, because it isn't relevant to everyone. And part of useful medicine is about being clear and honest about these things. So here's a takeaway, an inflammation and mood checklist, if you like. Number 1, is this likely relevant to me? Consider pushing for an inflammation workup if any of the following apply. You've tried 2 or more antidepressants with limited effect. Your depression has a flat and withdrawn quality more than an anxious one. You have another inflammatory condition, obesity, an autoimmune condition, inflammatory bowel disease, a chronic infection, or you've had significant childhood adversity, or your mood has worsened noticeably around a physical illness, dental work, or surgery. So 3 questions worth asking your GP. 1, could we check my CRP? It's a basic, inexpensive blood test for systemic inflammation. It's rarely ordered in depression workups, and it's worth asking for. 2, could my mood be connected to something physical, inflammation, gut health, or a hormonal shift? This is the Bullmore question, and a good GP will engage with it. Is there anything in my history that might suggest that this isn't straightforward, call it a serotonin problem, though there's a lot of problems with that as well. And that opens the door to conversation without being adversarial. What about lifestyle interventions ranked by evidence, as I mentioned earlier? Number 1, sleep. Fix this first. Broken sleep is one of the most potent drivers of inflammation we know. It's important to get at least 6, probably 7.5 hours of sleep per night, to try to sleep having eaten not less than 3 hours before, and to try and sleep the whole night if possible. 2, consistent movement. 10,000 steps a day or equivalent, sustained exercise. It doesn't have to be high intensity, but you do have to be consistent. It should be a daily routine. And you can divide it up into morning and evening, 5,000, 5,000, whatever works for you. Number 3, a Mediterranean pattern diet. Reduced ultra-processed food, increased fish, olive oil, vegetables, legumes. The microbiome changes faster than most people expect. Number 4, oral health. Treat gum disease as systemic inflammation. Tell your dentist you're asking for this reason. Number 5, stress regulation. Yoga, meditation, breath work. The woo-woo era is over. The mechanism is now actually documented. And one thing to remember, antidepressants work well for many people who take them. This isn't an argument against them. However, there can also be other reasons upstream of that problem that need addressing. This is an argument for investigating further, most crucially those people who don't respond at all and who are suffering and label as resistant to treatment. Bullmore's central argument that for a significant number of people depression is an inflammatory disease being treated as a chemical one is certainly not fringe science. It's in Nature Medicine and The Lancet. It's being actively studied at Cambridge, and the evidence base is growing. The medicine is moving. The prescribing hasn't quite kept up as yet. If your mood has been low, if you felt flat, withdrawn, empty, not quite yourself, please don't assume it's weakness and don't assume it's entirely in your head. Consider that your brain might be quietly on fire in ways that you can't feel directly. And that fire, well, we can actually work with that. This is The Accidental Doctor, where the whole point is that medicine shouldn't require a doctor in the family to translate it. If something in this was useful to you or to someone you know, please pass it on. And if you're not subscribed yet, I'd genuinely appreciate it. Every subscriber changes how many people this reaches, and reaching people is why I'm doing this alongside a full week of actual medicine. Please do comment below also, as I do read all of the comments and I'll do my very best to respond to as many as I can. For now, take care of yourself. Ciao, and see you in the next one.